Hello, my name is Vladimir Chavez and this is a virtual presentation for IF4 conference. I'm going to talk about the film Noir's aesthetics in graphic novel and the case of Angelus Hostis. Angelus Hostis, scripted by Santiago Páez and illustrated by Rafael Carrasco, is one of the pioneer works of the graphic novels in Ecuador. It conveys the story of Lieutenant Cordova and his partner Cruz, who must solve a series of crimes that occur in the year 2120. Although the plot is futuristic, Cordova and Cruz dress in an old-fashioned way. They use guns with bullets, their enemies use laser guns, and their flying car looks like a classic Cadillac. Furthermore, both the graphics and the story follow a cinematic tradition. After briefly describing the situation of the comic and the graphic novel in Ecuador, this study will evaluate Angelus Hostis' relation to film noir, as well as the nature of the changes in space and time according to French theorist Gerard Genet. The year is 2120. During the span of 3 decades, the peaceful city of Cuenca, Ecuador, is rocked by 23 murders. Although criminals are usually arrested, a peculiar detail is disturbing Lieutenant Cordova of the local police. The murderers are respected members of the society who have temporarily fallen into a state of insanity. Moreover, in all the cases, witnesses report the presence of a supernatural creature. Cordova believes it to be the relentless angel of death, a character linked to the Judeo-Christian tradition. With the help of his fellow investigator Cruz, Cordova sets out on the streets, determined to solve the mystery. This is the beginning of Angelus Hostis, one of the first graphic novels published in Ecuador. The others are known in local cultural circles. Santiago Páez, screenwriter, is a science fiction writer, and Rafael Carrasco, comic painter, is known for his cartoons in the prestigious newspaper El Mercurio. The present study will evaluate the link between the plot and the graphic language of Angelus Hostis on the one hand and the cinematic genre known as film noir on the other. First, there will be a short introduction to the world of comics and the graphic novel in Ecuador. Subsequently, we will proceed to define film noir and mention its most important features. This essay will then analyze Páez and Carrasco's work and its association with the cinematic language. As a result, it will be demonstrated that the changes in space and time, returning to Angelus Hostis as an example of the style film noir, are related to the theory of hypertextuality by the French theorist Gerard Genet. Finally, we will move on to the conclusions. There are a few works that compile information about Ecuadorian comics and graphic novels. Among these are texts of informative value, as the newspaper article Historia del Cómic Ecuatoriano, The History of the Ecuadorian Comic, by Juan Zavala, an expert on the local graphic narrative. Another important work, though failing to achieve attention from the media, is a research by Caterine Orquera Polanco, a review of comics from Quito. In her study, she links the comic book to historical events and trends and, at certain times, the development of humor and political satire. As examples of comics and graphic novels, we have the works Venimos de Lejos, Privatefalia, La Línea, and Así se hace el Carnaval from 2002. Film noir is a concept used by French filmmakers to designate a set of films that were produced in the United States during World War II. These were films which had a cynical, pessimistic, and dark spirit. However, before discussing film noir, it is necessary to briefly clarify the relationship it retains with the literary genre of noir fiction, which in turn maintains strong ties with another literary trend between crime, the hard-boiled subgenre. For Paul Schroeder, the hard-boiled tradition includes the noir fiction and is one of 4 historical and cultural circumstances that allowed the emergence and development of film noir in the United States. The other 3 are war and post-war disillusionment, post-war realism, and the German influence, finally. In the first case, Schroeder believes that the war and post-war disillusionment is actually the result of a process that had its beginnings 10 years earlier, at the start of the Great Depression, so that certain films were willing to show a less optimistic insight of the local society. In the same line of thought, the post-war realism appears and becomes a popular artistic trend during those years, and economic difficulties and social conflicts were portrayed starkly not only in the United States, but also across the Atlantic. Lastly, the German influence refers to the work of German and Eastern European filmmakers that had migrated to settle in America since 1920. They work in Hollywood and apply the style and aesthetics of German Expressionism, particularly the technique of claroscuro. Certainly, Schrader's reflections are a good starting point for this study. Some characteristics of hard-boiled and noir fiction that have shaped the concept of film noir, with the visual influence of German Expressionism, are presented in Angelus' Hostis. At last, we come to the difficult task of defining film noir. Schrader finds that there are practically as many definitions as there are film critics. However, he confirms that film noir is both a style and a Hollywood period beginning with The Maltese Falcon from 1941, directed by John Huston, and ending with Touch of Evil, 1958, by Orson Welles. His definition, which is also based on the thoughts of Raymond Durnat, is the most commonly accepted. Back to the Future, film noir's retrofashion in year 2120. The examples that demonstrate the link between film noir and Angelus' Hostis range from geographic location, clothing, characters, and surrounding objects, for example cars, guns, etc., to the psychological and aesthetics approaches, the construction of the characters and the influence of German Expressionism, especially the constant play of light and shadow. We will point out these similarities, from the first use of chiaroscuro and its relation to the mood of the protagonist. In this sequence, as Porfirio states, its noirness lies precisely in the connection between mice and a scene and mental states. Here the connotation of entrapment carried by earlier scenes. Initially, in Angelus' Hostis, the angel of death has been present during a murder. In the following scene, Cordova reconstructs the mystery surrounding this particular series of crime. The play with light and shadow is permanent in Angelus' Hostis. Generally, black and white combine to achieve the effect of a turbid atmosphere, but on some occasions, the direct effect is the creation of fear or tension in the reader, as you can see in this example. At other moments, the location in itself, with the symbolism, contributes enhancing the mental state of the characters. Cordova and Cruz moved through the old streets of Cuenca, entered colonial tenements, inquired an antique cathedral, and walked among centuries-old skeletons catacombs. These adventures in closed space take place at twilight in ghost-like environments loaded with tension. For example, here. The drawings of Rafael Carrasco in Angelus' Hostis imitate certain cinematic camera angles. Schrader points out as a typical stylistic feature of film noir the breakdown of the American tradition, represented in directors like Griffith and John Ford, caused by the influence of German Expressionism, which prefers vertical camera movements and angles. The feeling of instability caused is perfect to show the characters' feelings of despair or fear. Finally, the most appropriate motif in Angelus' Hostis is that of Guignol, horror and fantasy. Durnat emphasized the influence of German Expressionism in some film noir movies, not only in style but also in the action represented in their discourse. Characters and fantastic or terrifying events have been successful in American cinema, especially in times like the Great Depression, and some features of film noir have also had a posterior presence in Western pop art. Angelus' Hostis is science fiction. It gives life not only to inexistent creatures, but furthermore describes a seemingly utopian world with an economic order and a world government supposedly responsible for ensuring the welfare of the planet. However, there truly are dystopian communities. The countries are dominated by interfaces interested in maintaining certain levels of violence. In his work Palimpsestes, the French narratologist Gerard Genette analyzed the nature of the relation uniting literary texts. Among those, he defines hypertextuality as an extensive co-presence of a previous work in another. Hypertextuality has two major categories: transformation and imitation. In the case of Angelus Hostis, we deal with an imitation of style, film noir. Genet believes in the correspondence between the arts and says his typology can adapt to different cultural products. He even mentions some examples of transformation and imitation in music and painting. While Genet does not specifically comment on the case of cinematic style and its possible link to the graphic novel, one may find parallels in both fields from the equivalence in actions, themes or characters, building, transformation, and also in the visual language that is imitation. Here we have some examples of old objects in a futuristic view. In Angelus Hostis, we experience a change of time. The common image of the classical film noir, the 1940s and 50s, survives in its own way in a future society. Even so, at the same time, there is a change of place. American film noir is repeated in an Ecuadorian city, Cuenca. This kind of transformation, in which the actions develop in a different historical and geographical context, is called diegetic transposition by Genet. At the same time, the process of transformation also features a characteristic called heterodiegetic narrative. Not only are space and time different, the characters are also change identity. Although in our case we do not compare the influence of one book in another, but of a style, which is a more general concept within a work, we may think of the classic image of the film noir detective movie. Genet gives the example of Ulysses of Homer, who becomes Leopold Bloom in Joyce's work. In Angelus Hostis, the pretextual equivalents to Lieutenant Cordova are the detectives Philip Marlowe and Sam Spade, played in its heyday by actor Humphrey Bogart. Which are the consequences of performing a diegetic transposition? Firstly, the Ecuadorian reader is more easily identified with a local city, Cuenca, than with a US location. Secondly, a technological futuristic environment with urban speculations about how the city may look like in 100 years result attractive to the consumer of the graphic novel. Additionally, this kind of transformation allows social critique. If the psychopaths of the future are inhuman half-machines interfaces, a concern about the pros and cons of an excessive technological development arises. As one of the features of the diegetic transposition, a reflection upon the symbolism of special change is also appropriate. Schrader already mentioned the importance of the city that overwhelms the anti-hero. Cuenca was chosen in 1999 by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site thanks to its old downtown. It is the third largest city in Ecuador, known for its religious art and its reputation as a conservative city. Here we can find the right place to show old and ghostly buildings, perfect to execute the technique of chiaroscuro. Moreover, numerous churches create the necessary atmosphere to allow the appearance of supernatural creatures such as angels. For the year 2120, the city could perfectly allow coexistence between new and old, between the new and the old, between science and religion. Some images about Cuenca that are drawn in the book Angelus Hostis. Conclusion. Despite the fact that Angelus Hostis is not a movie, it is a graphic product with striking similarities with the cinematic style and period in Hollywood called film noir. This study has highlighted, with examples, the elements that link a corrupt system, society, an ambiguous attitude of the police towards legality, also female fatale, we can find colloquial language, and the development of the film noir classic motifs. Moreover, the importance of the locations and the influence of German expressionism in the use of chiaroscuro and graphic style, showing unstable angles, such as high-angle and low-angle shots. Previously, we have listed the bonds of film noir with the hard-boiled tradition and noir fiction. Finally, we have built on Gerard Genet's theory to explain the presence of a type of aesthetics of the 40s and 50s that is repeated in the hypothetical society of Cuenca in the year 2120. These historical geographical variations allow the local reader to feel more empathy to the plot and discover a kind of criticism towards future societies that prioritize technology over humanism. Thank you very much.